What if I told you that the very thing you've been relying on to fix your life is actually the reason you're still stuck? Think about it. You've been logical your whole life. You've followed the rules. You've worked hard. You've budgeted. You've tried to make the right decisions. And yet, here you are, still broke, still frustrated, still wondering why nothing seems to change. I know this sounds strange, even a little uncomfortable, but I want you to sit with this for a second. What if logic is keeping you broke? See, logic isn't bad. It has its place. It's what helps you cross the street safely, balance your checkbook, follow a recipe, or solve a math problem. But logic only works within what it already knows. And here's the problem with that. What you already know has gotten you exactly where you are right now, which means if you want to go beyond this point, if you want to step into a level of wealth and freedom you've never known before, you cannot get there by logic alone. Logic is like a prison. It's built on your past experiences, your fears, your doubts, and the voices of people who told you to be realistic. Logic is survival-based. It was designed to keep you safe, not to make you abundant. So if all you ever do is listen to logic, you'll keep repeating the same cycle, working harder, stressing more, and staying stuck in the same limits year after year. That's why so many people, maybe even you, feel like you're banging your head against a wall. You're doing everything that makes sense, but the results don't add up. Why? Because wealth doesn't start with logic. Wealth starts where logic ends. Let me give you an example. There was a time in my life when I did everything that seemed logical. I followed the script that society gave me. Work harder, save every penny, don't take risks, stay in your lane. And yet, no matter how many hours I worked or how careful I was with money, I never felt free. I was just surviving, not living. Then I realized something. Logic was keeping me tied to the 1% of reality that I could see. But there was another 99%, possibilities, opportunities, abundance, that logic could never show me. That 99% belongs to imagination, creativity, intuition, and faith. And this is where most people miss it. They think wealth is about doing more of what makes sense. But real wealth, real transformation, comes from stepping into what doesn't make sense, at least not to your logical mind. Think about every major breakthrough in history. Airplanes, electricity, the internet. None of these things were logical at the time. People laughed, mocked, and dismissed them. But the people who created them weren't operating on logic alone. They tapped into imagination and faith. They believed in something their logical mind couldn't yet see. And the same is true for you. If you want to change your life, if you want to step into a level of abundance you've never experienced before, you're going to have to let go of the belief that logic alone will get you there. Because logic will always tell you why it won't work. Logic will always point to the bills, the risks, the past failures. Logic will remind you of what's safe and familiar. But intuition will point you to possibilities. Faith will open doors logic didn't even know existed. And imagination will expand your reality far beyond what you thought was possible. That's why I say logic is keeping you broke. Because the life you want, the wealth you dream about, isn't logical. It's not supposed to be. It's supernatural. It's creative. It's abundant. And to get there, you have to step out of the prison of logic and into the freedom of faith and imagination. So let me ask you a question. What decision in your life have you been putting off because it doesn't make sense? What dream have you been ignoring because logic told you it's too risky, too late, or too impossible? That's the doorway to your next level. And in just a moment, I'm going to show you why logic can never create new results, and how you can finally break free from it. But first, let's expose the lie of logic even deeper, so you can see exactly why it's been holding you back all this time. You know what I realized? Logic feels safe. That's why we cling to it. It gives us rules. It gives us a plan. It makes us feel in control. If I do A, then B will happen. If I save a little, work a little harder, and follow the formula, then eventually life should get better, right? But here's the lie. Logic doesn't actually create new outcomes. Logic only recycles the past. Think about it. Logic is based on what you already know, and what you already know comes from your past experiences, your upbringing, your culture, your failures, your fears. Logic cannot stretch beyond that. It can only predict based on what it's already seen. So when you say, "I'll never make more than this," or "that kind of opportunity isn't for me," you think you're being logical. But what you're really doing is projecting your past into your future. Logic doesn't create growth, it just repeats the cycle. Science backs this up. Do you know that your conscious mind only processes a tiny fraction of reality? Neuroscientists estimate that what we call logic operates on less than 1% of the data available to us. The rest, 99%, is filtered out. That means when you're relying on logic, you're relying on the sliver of reality that your brain thinks is safe. It ignores the infinite other possibilities right in front of you. That's why people stay stuck. They say it doesn't make sense. Of course it doesn't. Because the thing that will change your life is in the 99% your logic doesn't recognize yet. Here's an example. Remember when Peter and the disciples were fishing all night in Luke 5? They caught nothing. Logic told them there are no fish. Their experience told them this isn't working. But then Jesus said, "Cast your nets on the other side." To their logical mind, that made no sense. Same lake, same boat, same nets. Why would switching sides change anything? But when they obeyed, their nets overflowed with fish. That story isn't just about fishing, it's about exposing the lie of logic. Logic says, if it didn't work before, it won't work now. Faith says, obedience can open abundance even when it doesn't make sense. And this isn't just spiritual, it's practical. Think of innovation. Before airplanes existed, logic said humans can't fly. Before electricity, logic said darkness is normal after sunset. Before the internet, logic said instant global connection was impossible. If humanity had only relied on logic, none of these breakthroughs would exist. But here's the trap. Most of us live as if logic is the only authority. We reject dreams because they don't make sense. We ignore opportunities because they don't fit the math. We silence our intuition because it sounds crazy. And in doing so, we keep ourselves small. I used to live that way. I used to analyze everything. Should I risk this? Should I try that? I wanted certainty before I moved. But you know what? Logic gave me certainty, all right? The certainty that nothing would change. My income stayed flat. My life stayed predictable. Safe. But suffocating. It wasn't until I started questioning logic that things began to shift. What if logic isn't the highest authority? What if logic is just one tool, but not the truth? What if my breakthrough is hiding in the place that doesn't make sense yet? That's when I began stepping into faith, into imagination, into intuition. And suddenly, doors opened I never saw before. People showed up. Ideas came alive. Opportunities multiplied. It wasn't because I got smarter, it was because I stopped letting logic blind me to the other 99% of reality. Let me put it this way. Logic is like trying to navigate a city by only looking at the street in front of you. You'll keep circling the same blocks. Faith and imagination are like climbing to the top of a skyscraper and seeing the whole map. Suddenly, there are roads you never knew existed. So here's what I want you to understand. The lie of logic is that it will keep you safe and successful. The truth is, logic will keep you small and stuck. You don't need more logic to change your life. You need more vision, more creativity, more faith. The Bible says in 1 Corinthians 2:9, "No eye has seen, no ear has heard, no mind has conceived what God has prepared for those who love him." Did you catch that? Your logical mind can't even conceive what God has in store. Which means if you only trust logic, you'll miss the very things God designed for you. So let me ask you again. How many opportunities have you ignored because they didn't make sense? How many times have you stayed in the boat because your logical mind said there are no fish? The lie of logic has kept people broke, not because they lack ability, but because they refuse to step into the unknown. And that brings us to the next truth. If logic won't get you there, what will? That's where the other self comes in. The part of you that taps into the 99% of possibility. And that's exactly what we'll talk about next. Here's the part most people don't realize. You're not just one self. You actually have two. There's the logical self, the ego, the part of you that lives in fear, survival, and the known. It's the voice that says, be careful, play it safe, don't look stupid, stick with what you know. It's the side that clings to logic because logic feels like control. And that's why most people live small lives. They let this self dominate. But then there's the other self, the self connected to infinite possibility, the self that can imagine a reality bigger than your circumstances, the self that's bold enough to step into the unknown, even when it doesn't make sense. This is the self that God breathed into you when he said in Genesis, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it." One self is about survival, the other is about creation. Now, let me break this down practically. Your logical self only sees through the lens of the past. It gathers data from your experiences and says, okay, based on what I've seen before, here's what's possible. So if you've always struggled with money, logic says, you'll always struggle. If you've always been shy, logic says you'll never succeed in sales. If you've always failed at diets, logic says you'll never get fit. That's how the logical self works. It's like a lawyer building a case with old evidence. But the other self, the infinite self, doesn't care about past evidence. It operates by faith. It imagines a future not yet seen and says, that's possible, that belongs to me. It's not reckless. It's creative. It's visionary. It sees into the 99% that logic filters out. That's why Albert Einstein said, logic will get you from A to B. Imagination will take you everywhere. Einstein knew this. He wasn't just a scientist. He was a man who dared to think beyond what made sense. If he stayed stuck in logic, relativity would have never been discovered. And the Bible echoes this too. Hebrews 11:1 says, "Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen." Did you catch that? Faith is evidence, but not the kind logic can measure. Faith is the evidence of the unseen, the 99% realm where creation happens. So here's what I learned. If you want to step into wealth, freedom, or purpose, you cannot stay stuck in the logical self. You have to let the other self take the lead. This is exactly what happened in my own life. For years, I lived in the logical self. I made decisions based on fear on what seemed safe. I looked at my bills, my bank account, my limited circle, and I thought, this is all there is. And every day felt the same. Survival, struggle, no growth. But when I started listening to the other self, the one that whispered, what if there's more? What if you could reach people beyond your town? What if your ideas could serve thousands instead of just a handful? That's when my life began to expand. That's when I dared to step into online selling. That's when I risked putting myself out there even when I felt uncomfortable. And guess what? That's when the growth came. Not because I suddenly worked harder, not because I cracked some new logical formula, but because I let the other self, the infinite self, take the wheel. Now, don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying logic is useless. Logic has its place, but logic is a servant, not a master. It's a tool for building what imagination first envisions. You never let the builder design the house, you let the architect do that. Your infinite self is the architect. Logic is just the hammer and nails. This is why Jesus told the disciples to cast their nets on the right side of the boat. It was a physical picture of a spiritual truth. The left side represents logic, the known, the part of you that says there's nothing here. The right side represents faith, obedience, and imagination, the side that sees what logic cannot. And when they obeyed, their nets were overflowing. That's what happens when the other self leads. Let me ask you, which self have you been living from? The logical self that clings to fear and scarcity? Or the other self that dares to imagine more, to believe more, to step into the unseen? Because until you switch, you'll stay broke, stuck, and frustrated. Not because abundance doesn't exist, but because logic keeps you blind to it. And here's the good news. You don't have to kill your logical self, you just have to put it in its proper place. Stop letting it steer the car. Let your infinite self drive. That's when you start manifesting. Not by bending reality, but by aligning with the reality God already created for you. Now, in a moment, I'll show you how this plays out in real life. How following the other self has led to breakthroughs for me and for others who dared to trust it. But before that, let me challenge you. What's one area of your life where logic has been the boss? What would happen if, just once, you chose to follow the whisper of faith instead? Here's the beautiful thing. Stepping out of the prison of logic into the freedom of the other self isn't complicated. It's simple. Not always easy, but simple. And it begins with awareness. Step 1. Notice when you're trapped in logic. You can't change what you can't see. So the first step is catching yourself when logic is running the show. Logic usually shows up as fear-based decisions. Think about it. How many times have you wanted to take a risk, start a business, post a video, or invest in yourself? And the first voice that came up was, what if it doesn't work? That's logic. Logic thrives on past evidence. You failed before, you'll fail again. Or it leans on statistics. Only a few people succeed, the rest don't. But here's the catch. Logic is looking at the 1% of reality it can see, not the 99% that exists. The moment you hear yourself shrinking because it doesn't make sense or feels risky, pause. That's your red flag. In my own life, I realized logic was keeping me small when I hesitated to go online with my business. The logical side said, you don't know enough. Nobody will care. What if you look foolish? That was the prison of logic talking. And until I noticed it, I kept obeying it without question. Awareness is the first key. Step 2. Follow what lights you up, even if it makes no sense. This is where courage comes in. The other self speaks through desire, imagination, intuition, and faith. Sometimes it's a little whisper, sometimes it's a crazy idea. And yes, it usually won't make sense to logic. But here's the secret. That's exactly why it's powerful. When I started listing products online, it made no sense. I didn't have a big following. I didn't have funding. On paper, it looked ridiculous. But something inside me lit up. I felt energy when I thought about reaching people beyond my immediate circle. And following that light, despite the doubts, is what multiplied my business. Think of Abraham. God told him to leave his land and go to a place he didn't even know yet. To his logical self, that was madness. But Abraham followed the voice of the other self, faith, and became the father of nations. That's the pattern. What lights you up, even if it makes no sense, is often the seed of your destiny. Step 3. Play in the 99% through visualization, scripting, and imagination. Here's where it gets fun. Logic deals with the seen world. The other self deals with the unseen. And one of the most powerful ways to access the unseen is through imagination. Science even backs this up. Your brain doesn't know the difference between a vividly imagined experience and a real one. That's why athletes practice visualization before games. They're literally training their nervous system to expect victory. The Bible says in Proverbs 29:18, where there is no vision, the people perish. Vision isn't logical. It's spiritual. It's imaginative. It's seeing with the eyes of faith. For me, I started scripting what I wanted my life to look like. I wrote down, as if it already happened, the kind of business I was building, the customers I was serving, the freedom I was experiencing. And here's the crazy part. Little by little, those words became my reality. Why? Because my focus set my frequency, and my frequency shaped my experience. Visualization, scripting, and imagination aren't childish games. They're tools to access the 99% that logic hides. They reprogram your mind to see possibilities instead of problems. So here's how you can start today. When fear shows up, pause and say, this is just logic trying to keep me safe. But I don't need safety, I need growth. Ask yourself, what lights me up? And commit to following one small action in that direction this week, no matter how illogical it seems. Spend 5 minutes a day visualizing your future as if it's already here. See it, feel it, write it. Let your imagination become the training ground for your spirit. That's how you break free from logic's cage. That's how you let the other self take the lead. Now let me land this with something personal. The reason I'm even making this video right now is because of these steps. If I stayed trapped in logic, I'd still be stuck in the same routines, same limits, same cage. But when I noticed logic's lies, followed what lit me up, and played in the 99% with imagination, my whole life shifted. And here's what I've learned. Abundance was never far away. It was always near. I just needed the awareness and courage to step into it. So let me challenge you. What would happen if, just for 1 week, you lived by these 3 steps? What if you refused to let logic call the shots, followed what sparked joy, and gave yourself permission to play in the unseen? I'll tell you what will happen. You'll begin to notice doors you never saw before. And when you walk through them, you'll realize the life you've been waiting for has been waiting for you all along.